Today we're taking a break from crochet and learning how to use round knitting looms. You can buy them in sets of 4 like this in many places. Michael's, Walmart, I think Mary Maxim has them. If you're in the US, probably Joann's has them too, I don't know. Take a look in your yarn department. They come with a set of 4 rings or round looms, a loom hook, and a darning needle. They usually come with instructions on how to make the hat we're going to do today. Hopefully this video can help you out in case those instructions don't make too much sense to you. Now you'll see some of my looms here have marks on them. I've done that with Sharpie, and I do that for color work purposes. Yours won't have marks on it, but you can use a Sharpie to modify it how you'd like. In today's video, we're going to make a hat with a brim. And for hats for human heads, generally this size would probably work for a newborn, but it'd be very thick, so I'm not sure that's appropriate necessarily. So we're going to take that one out. And this one's way too big for a hat, even if you have a gigantic head. So we're going to put that one aside for today. Those looms do have uses. Maybe we'll get to those another day. These looms make hats that are for a more human-sized head. Now this one, the second biggest one, is the one that I use the most. It works for adults and most kids. I saved the purple one for those kids who just have very tiny heads. Today I'm going to use this orange one to show you how to do a basic hat. I also like this orange one because it has 36 pegs, which is easy to divide up when you're doing color work, whereas the smaller one has 29, which is a prime number, so it doesn't divide by anything. This is why this is my favorite one. Now you'll see the loom has a peg. That's somewhat useful. You don't have to use it though, so if your loom doesn't have this peg, I'll show you how you can use your loom without it. I've put marks, I put a single mark directly across on the peg, so halfway, and then I've put these double marks on the quarters. But we don't need those today. Let's get started. Let's talk about the yarn you'll need. The kind of yarn you need is based on how big these pegs are and how far apart they are, but usually they're spaced in a way that makes sense for how big the peg is. Now, I find that these standard looms you get in the set of 4 work best with a bulky yarn. I'd say the skinniest yarn you'll want to use will be a 5. An example is the Loops and Threads Charisma. And the biggest you'll want to use is 6. And I'd say the biggest I use on this is the Bernat blanket. The Charisma makes a more floppy, thinner hat, and the blanket makes a stiffer but thicker hat. So you want your yarn to be in between there. Now I'm going to apologize because the yarn I'm using today has been discontinued. I just have so much of it and it's perfect on the loom. So you can see this is a 6. So it's more in line with the blanket yarn. But this is a little bit thinner than the blanket yarn, so it's not going to be quite as stiff of a hat. Another thing you can do with these looms, but I wouldn't recommend on your first hat, is hold 2 strands of worsted together. That makes a really good hat. Maybe we'll cover that in a future video. So we're going to start on the side that has the peg. And you take your yarn, you find your end here. You want to leave a bit of an end for weaving in. Just wrap it around that peg like that. And it'll hold this end for you. If you don't have this peg, go ahead and just wrap it around one of the pegs that you've designated as your first one, and then tack this down. You might want to put like a stitch marker over top just to hold it down. You only need to hold it until you can come back around, and then you can fix it. Since I have the peg, I'm going to use it. We'll do that. Okay. So after you've wrapped this peg that's pointing out, you're going to move your yarn between those 2 pegs here to the back. I'm just going to hold it there so I can show you. See where we are here? Now you can wrap in either direction. Whichever one is more comfortable for you is the one you should do. I wrap going, counterclockwise? And I like doing it that way because I find it very fast. But you do what makes sense to you. We're going to start with something called an E-wrap. The reason why it's called an E-wrap is because it kind of looks like a cursive letter E over and over again. So just a loop-de-loop, basically. The finished project, in this case the hat, will have what looks like twisted knit stitches. And for me, that's fine. In another video, or you can check on YouTube, other people will show you how to do an actual knit stitch, and you can also purl. But for a simple hat, I don't bother. especially with this kind of yarn where you're not going to see the stitches very well anyway. Oh, I'm using Patton's Melody. Okay, so the yarn going to the back first, I'm going to wrap around this peg here. And I'm going to go from the back to the front, around, and to the back again. You can see sort of, if I turn it this way, it looks like a cursive E. Oop. All right, so once we've done one peg, we're going to go to the next one. We're just going to go from the back and around, from the back and around. And we're just going to do that all the way around the entire loom. Now you see my left hand here, I'm holding the loop that I just did. Because if I let go, it's just going to undo. Find a way that makes sense for you, that's comfortable for you, to hold on to that yarn as well. So around the back, around the front, and there. I'm moving my left hand. I'm going to do the next one. Now keep these loops loose, okay? You want them to be touching the peg, but not tight against them. If you do it too tightly, your hat will be fine. It'll just be harder to do the next step. So try to stay loose. Like I'm not even really holding the yarn, I'm just sort of guiding it. And I do hold the loom like this over my lap usually to wrap. So I'll show you what it looks like from this direction. So you go behind the next peg and over the top, and behind the next peg and over the top. And you can see how after years and like probably 1,000 of these hats, I can go pretty fast. I can't do it on camera very fast because I'm not looking at it the same way I usually do. But what you're going to do is just go all the way around the entire loom. Until you have all of your pegs wrapped. Pause here until you catch up. All right, you've got your first round. All the pegs have one loop on them. Do it again. We're going to go around that first peg again. We're not turning or anything. We're just going to keep going the way we were. So this is the last peg that I did on the first round. I'm going to go around on the second round again. Just doing the same thing. Again, try to stay loose, but still touching the peg. All the way around until you have 2 loops on every peg. Okay. I've wrapped 2 loops around every stitch. Pause here until you've caught up. All right. To hold this in place, because if I let go, this is just going to undo. So to hold this stitch in place, we're going to take our loom hook, go behind the bottom loop, and grab it onto your hook like so, and lift it over the peg. And that will hold your last stitch there. Also, before we continue on, we're going to take this off of this peg and just move it into the middle. There we go. So the next step is we need to get back to only 1 loop on all of the pegs. We did it there already. We're just going to do it to all of them around now. We're going to take the bottom loop. I like to go from the top to the bottom like this. Do what's comfortable. Some people find this better, but I find I accidentally catch the second loop when I do it that way. So, like so. Grab the second loop, or the bottom loop, and pull it over the peg. Make sure that top loop stays on there. Okay, bottom loop, over the peg. Do this all the way around. When your working yarn's in the way, just drop it out. You don't want it to get caught up in your stitches. So if you've stayed nice and loose, this should be fairly easy. If you're finding it difficult, it's probably you were just too tight. Don't bother ripping out, just keep going, unless it hurts. If it hurts, rip back and try again. It's not the end of the world if your row is too tight. It just makes this harder, that's all. There we go. Now all of the pegs have just one loop on them. All right. However, all the loops are at the top and we don't want that now. So we're going to go from behind and pull them down. Doing pulling them down like this has the advantage when you're doing color work of detangling your yarns. So that's nice. That's a nice perk. Okay, we have one round of yarn on our pegs. We need to add a second round. So here's our working yarn. I'm going to start on my first peg to the left of our starting one. Again, if you don't have this here, you might want to put a mark somewhere just so you know where you start, where you're starting and stopping. And we're going to do the same thing around the back to the front, like that, all the way around. All right. Pause until you've caught up. Now, to hold this in place, I'm going to go to the last stitch I wrapped, so this one, and pull the bottom over the top, and that holds the working yarn for us. And we're going to go around and lift the bottom loop over the pegs. Just do this all the way around. Pause here till you've caught up. We're going to move all these stitches down. I'm going to wrap all of the pegs, work, bottom loop over the top, push them down, wrap them again, bottom over the top. You want to keep going until your fabric in here, it'll start hanging down. You can't see it now because we've only done a few rows, but it will start hanging down this way. Keep going until you have about 5 or 6 inches, depending on the size of hat you're doing. And then pause here until you've caught up. Okay, I think I've got about 6 inches there. I'm just going to measure. I'll show you how to tell for sure. So you're going to drop your measuring tape down. This is what my hat looks like so far. You're going to drop your measuring tape down the middle. Fold out this bottom if you need to. And you can see we're at about 6 inches, approximately. Now, I wasn't measuring as I went, so how did I manage to hit it so perfectly? Well, the real answer is I've done this thousands of times, but the way that I tell while I'm working is I use my tool. This tool measures about 5 inches. You'll want to double check to make sure yours is 5 inches, or see how big it is. And while you're working, see, I have it down through the middle here. I'm going to poke the end through. There it is at the bottom. I'm going to hold the fabric out as, you know, I don't want to pull it tight or anything, just sort of normal, holding on to that. And then I'm going to look inside. And that looks like about 1 inch to me. If you wanted extra measuring tools on your person, you can use up to the first knuckle on your thumb. It's about 1 inch. So you can see, you know, my janky, I don't have a ruler measuring, it's about 6 inches. It's close enough. And as you see, when I measured, it was almost exactly 6 inches. So I highly recommend you measure all of your tools just in this case. All right, the next thing we need to do is weave in this end, because we're going to fold up this brim and it's going to be hidden. So I'm going to bring you down a little closer to see that. All right, so I'm sitting down now. Hopefully my chair won't squeak too much. For weaving in ends, we're going to need that darning needle that came in our kit, or whichever darning needle you like if you're already a knitter or crocheter or whatever. I'm going to thread my needle with the starting end. Okay. Now you see I've got the pin facing me. If you don't have the pin, it's wherever you started, should be facing you. I've got the loom upside down and the fabric's coming out at the top here. I'm going to move it down so we're in frame here. Now, how you do this doesn't actually matter. I'm going to show you my preferred method. You might be able to see, this yarn's very poofy, so maybe not, that we have a gap in this first row. So we have a loop, a loop, a loop, and there's kind of a gap before we get to this loop, this loop, this loop. I like to put that loop back in. I really hope this shows up on camera. So I've just follow what the yarn is doing anyway. So I'm going to go under this one, like so. And then I'm going to go behind this loop, like this. And then under this one, just to get the yarn to the back. And that adds the loop back. This loop's really annoying. You see how now it's loop, 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 loop. You don't want to pull this too tight. You want it to match the looseness of the other loops. But even if you don't do this, the next step is to weave in the ends. Now, I am not a knitter, so if you are a knitter and you know a better way, do it the way you know how to do it. This is how I do it. We've got these purl bumps going up the back of our stitches. I just go under those. So under that bump, under that bump. Just go up for, well, on this first pass, maybe 1.5 inches, just to get away from the edge. Now when you pull this, you don't want to pull this loop too tight, right? Okay, now I'm going to go down the next set of purl bumps, about 1 inch. And that's probably sufficient. This is a pretty poofy yarn. I'm going to cut it close. It's also inside the brim. It'll be there, so you don't even have to cut it very close because you won't see it. All right, we'll put our darning needle away for now. And I'm going to move the camera back up so we can see what we're doing for the next step. All right, so we're going to turn our loom back up so we can see inside. Here's the pegs. So we're going to fold up our brim now. This is tricky to show how to do, so I'm going to do my best here. I don't start at the peg. I like to start to the left of the peg, like if we had our loom like this. Start a few, say this one. We're going to follow the knit stitches down. See how we have these nice columns? We're going to follow them down until we find the loop at the bottom. We're going to move that loop up through the middle of the loom and onto the peg we've marked. Okay, now we should be able to see from the top Here's our next loop. We're going to put it on our next peg. Okay, you might have to shuffle the, sort of move this yarn or the hat brim around. Here's our next one. We're going to put it on the next peg. And just do it like this. We're basically putting that first round that we wrapped, the very first one, we're putting back onto our pegs. And by lining up that first one, we can be sure that our rim stitches are nice and vertical. I'm just going to finesse the hat brim here. Ooh. See how the loops are just here? You might need to pull the brim down to make sure that loop stays on the peg. Just do your best. As long as there's a loop on each peg, you'll have a nice warm hat. So make sure your working yarn is not in your way. You want it to stay out till you get to here. This is where we started. See, there's our peg. We want to move our working yarn to the outside of the hat because we don't want it trapped inside the brim. So I'm putting it between my first and last peg. That's my first peg, that's my last peg. So I'm pulling it out there. And then we'll continue to add our loops on. So now we have 2 loops on every peg. We're going to work them off like we normally do. These top ones are going to have a tendency to pop off, so just take this round slowly. And if it pops off, just stop and put it back on. This is the one case where that is super easy to do. It's easy to find, it's easy to do, it's not going to fall down. You're good to go. There we go. And I'm going to pull them all down. And now we have a brim for our hat. That's what it looks like on the inside. All right, pause here until you catch up. To continue our hat, it's going to blow your mind. We're going to just wrap the pegs again and keep going exactly the way we have been. Grab your working yarn, go around your first peg, and off you go. Do this until the hat's as big as you want. I usually go about 5 or 6 inches for this step. You can pause here until you catch up to about 5 or 6 inches. I just wanted to pop in here while I was working on my the top part of my hat to show you I had a loop come off the top of this peg, and I wanted to show you how to fix that if it happens to you. It's super easy. You can see, like, unlike regular knitting, it's not going to fall down on us. It would if both loops had come off. So we're going to take this loop, and since we're doing the E-wrap stitch, we're going to give it a twist and put it around. I banged into the camera stand, sorry. And just put it back on. You see how it looks fine there? Just give it a little twist and put it back on. All right, I think I'm at where I'd like to be. Here's my fabric so far. There's the brim. It's very easy to see. That's about 6 inches. I again just measured with my tool here. I poke it in, see it there, just at the top of the brim. Hang on to that. And then look inside. It's about right. Let's see what it actually is, shall we? Okay, we're going to go down to, there's the brim. Would you look at that? All right, so we're all done here. Done doing the rounds anyway. It's time to bind off. So I've got my hat. We're going to do the easiest bind off I've ever seen. It's the drawstring bind off. First thing you want to do is you're going to have to cut your yarn. Grab my scissors there. And you want your working yarn to be able to reach all the way across the loom and then some. So I'm going to cut my yarn. Again, don't stretch it. Just across the loom. And then I'm going to add another, 6 inches? I need new scissors. Okay, so now we have this end. Time to go back to our first peg here. We're just going to lay the yarn across the front. Okay, we're not wrapping it around, we're just laying it on top of the first stitch. Then we're going to lift the bottom over the top, and then we're going to pull this working yarn out. And that's how you bind off a stitch. Let's do the next one. So we just lay it on the front. I'm just holding it with this hand here to keep it a little bit taut. Lift the bottom loop over the top, and then pull out this loop. Okay, I keep running into, I'm going to have to do it this way. Here we go. On to the next stitch. Bottom over the top, and then pull this out. I'm going to do that all the way across. Now I'm using a yarn that's kind of poofy and uneven. So I'm going to be very careful for this drawstring. I used to go all the way around and then pull the drawstring, but I ended up snapping my yarn a few times, and that's a mistake that's hard to get back from when you're new. Even when you're like me and have made thousands of these hats, it's really annoying. So I'm going to work to about 1/4 of the way around, which I have actually marked on my loom, so I know where it is, but you know, close enough is close enough. Okay, so here I am about 1/4 of the way around my loom. You can see the fabric coming off here, and I'm just going to carefully move these loops towards the end there. They're not going to move much, but they will move a little, and we're moving on here. So we're going to cast off the next stitch there. I'm going to go all the way around doing the same thing. Now when I get to about halfway around, I'm going to pause and slide the stitches down again. And it'll be easy to know when you're all halfway across because you'll have a very short end. Whatever leeway you added on, that's how much you'll have here. So about 6 inches. You'll be about halfway around. I do have a mark there on mine, so I'm halfway around. I'm going to put it down, and I'm going to slide just very gently. Okay, I'm not tugging very hard at all. I'm just sliding them where they want to go. And we'll keep going. Whoops. And I am 1/4 of the way around again. We're at 3/4 now. And again, I'm just going to move the stitches if they want to move down the string. If you have a smooth yarn, you might not need to do this. You might find it useful to do anyway. Just be very gentle, because if you snap this yarn, it's a tricky fix. You really need to be able to see your stitches very well if you break it. I'll try and do a tutorial on how to fix that someday, but as a beginner, you want to avoid it at all costs, okay? Here we are on the last one. Do the same thing, do the same thing and pull it out, and now we're off of the loom. Let's put that aside. I'm going to move the camera in closer so that we can see what I'm doing. All right, so we've got our hat off of the loom. We've got quite a hole at the top, and here's our working yarn. First thing I'm going to do is thread my needle onto that yarn. Okay. Next, I'm going to put my left hand, or my non-dominant hand, into the hat and grab the needle, and I'm going to pull the hat inside out. Okay, and now I've got my yarn out. So we've got this hole here. We want to close it as much as we can, being nice and careful not to break the yarn. Okay, we're just going to do short little pulls, adjust when needed. And there goes that hole, closing up. It's just, I can't even fit my finger in there. Close it as much as you can. Okay, it doesn't have to be tight, and I'll show you why. The way we're going to weave our ends in. If you see, hopefully you can see these stitches. These are the last wraps. Sorry, I'm probably pretty loud here. This is the last wrap we did around the pegs, and they sort of make a flower shape here, right? We want to work under those loops. The first place I'm going to work, though, is directly across from where my yarn is. Okay, so we have a rough circle here. I'm going to go across like this. So I can't do this looking through the camera. I'm going to put my needle in on the other side here, and I'm going to put it under as many of these as I can, hoping to get like a quarter of the way around. So about halfway around towards where your end was. Okay, so here's where the end was when we finished knitting. Here's where I've inserted my needle, and here's where it's coming out. So it's coming out, like we inserted halfway across, and we're coming out halfway in between, roughly. So I'm going to pull my needle through again, be gentle. Okay, so that's closed up the hole pretty well. I'm going to go directly across again, like so. I'm going to insert here, but I'm not going to go under too many. I'm going to go under like 2, maybe 3, like that. And now I'm going to go under those again and make a knot. Do this twice, just to be extra sure. We don't want that coming apart. And then we just weave in the end. So again, I look for those purl bumps. If you're a knitter and you know a better way to do this, do it the better way. It's going to go under a line of purl bumps on the back of the stitches. Like that. And then I'll go up another line. And for this yarn, that is good enough. It's poofy enough that it'll stay in place. If your yarn is more slippery, maybe go back a third direction. And here is our hat. Of course, I got an off-white hat on a light wood background. Let's see if I can fix that. All right, so here it is on my cutting mat. Don't worry, all of that yellow paint is dry. Here's our finished hat. You see it's kind of bunched up at the top, but when it's on a head, it's not as obvious because it'll round it out. Well, because we're on my cutting mat, we can see how big this is. It measures about 10 inches in height, approximately. And what is that? Wait, 9 inches in height. That makes more sense. 6 inches plus half of 6 inches. And about 10 inches wide. But it is stretchy a little bit, so and it'll scrunch. So this will work for most human heads. This loom, this pattern. I hope this video helped you. And watch for ones coming up in the future on how to do color work and how to choose a loom once you get the hang of it. Thanks for watching. Oh, Oh, can Mama do her video? No? Can Mama do the video? Off you go. There you go. Okay, yes. Come on, baby. Come on. There you go. Yeah? Meow, yes.